Welcome back, Wolfpack. We have a massive dilemma for you today, and we need your official ruling in the comments. Imagine this. The guy who completely shattered your heart in college ghosts you, only to show up on your front porch 4 years later. The twist? He's now a billionaire alpha trying to bulldoze your family's estate. So, here is the question we need you to answer right now. Do you take his massive buyout check and walk away? Or do you hand him a rusted push mower, point at the waist-high weeds, and make him suffer for it? Drop your answers down below, because the banter in this one is off the charts, and things are about to get incredibly messy. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The rusted blade of the push mower let out a metallic screech that perfectly matched my mood. I kicked the tire, sending a cloud of dried grass, dirt, and mosquito dust into the stifling afternoon air. The Green Hollow estate was officially a jungle, and I was losing the war against weeds that were currently staging a leafy coup around my ankles. Wiping sweat from my forehead with a dirt-caked glove, I leaned heavily against the wooden handle. My bad knee throbbed a steady, vicious rhythm. A souvenir from a hiking trip I refused to let slow me down, even if every step today felt like stepping on a rusty nail. Then, the distinct, wealthy crunch of expensive tires on my graveled driveway broke the quiet hum of the cicadas. I turned, a sleek, black town car, the kind that looked like it cost more than my entire genetic lineage, rolled to a stop right next to a patch of dying hydrangeas. The engine purred so quietly it felt actively insulting to my rusted lawnmower. The driver's side didn't open. Instead, the rear door swung wide. A highly polished leather dress shoe stepped out, crushing a dandelion. Then a perfectly tailored charcoal trouser leg. I braced myself for another one of those soulless vultures from Apex Real Estate. They had been bombarding my mailbox with aggressive buyout letters for months, threatening zoning fines and neighborhood compliance nonsense. The man stood up, casually buttoning his suit jacket. Broad shoulders, sharp jawline, and dark hair styled with maddening precision. He turned to face me. The air violently vacated my lungs. The heavy iron mower handle slipped from my grip, slamming into the dirt. It was Desmond, not just a corporate vulture. The guy who 4 years ago had memorized my incredibly complicated coffee order, debated philosophy with me until 2 a.m. on a stained dorm room couch, and then vanished 3 days before graduation without a single text message or explanation. He froze. I saw the exact second his perfectly curated, intimidating billionaire mask cracked, his dark eyes widened, darting from my mud-splattered overalls to my face. A flash of pure panic burned so brightly in his expression it was almost comical. He didn't know I owned this place. He thought he was just bullying a nameless, financially strapped local out of a prime real estate parcel. The shock quickly metastasized into a hot, buzzing rage right behind my ribs. I picked the mower handle back up, squaring my shoulders, letting the anger act as a necessary shield against the sudden, sharp ache in my chest. Desmond cleared his throat, desperately attempting to rebuild his corporate armor right in front of me. He took a calculated step forward, his expensive shoes crunching on a dead twig. "Sybil," he said. His voice was entirely too smooth, though I caught the slight, breathless rasp underneath. I wasn't expecting you to be the proprietor of this." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the chaotic, waist-high grass, the sagging front porch, and the wildly overgrown ivy threatening to swallow the mailbox. "Establishment. What do you want, Desmond?" I snapped, the bitterness completely unvarnished. "And if you say you're lost, I am going to introduce your custom suit to my compost bin." He straightened, sliding a hand into his pocket. Total arrogance. "I represent Apex Development. We've sent several letters regarding the acquisition of this land. Since the owner was ignoring them, I decided to handle the negotiation personally." He pulled a crisp, folded envelope from his inner jacket pocket, holding it out like a peace offering. "I am prepared to offer a sum that will more than compensate for the undeniable disrepair of the property." I stared at him. 4 years of absolute radio silence, and he shows up on my dying lawn to call my family home a dump and throw hush money at me. "The disrepair," I repeated flatly. "It's a biological hazard, Sybil," he pressed, taking another step. He was too big for this yard, too polished, radiating an annoying amount of confidence. "The local zoning board is practically weeping. I am offering you an out. A very, very generous out." He waved the envelope slightly. I didn't look at the paper. I looked at the man holding it. The guy who broke my heart was now a billionaire trying to buy my father's legacy out from under me. as if it were just a line item on a spreadsheet. I let out a harsh, utterly humorless laugh. I grabbed the handles of the heavy, rusted push mower, wheeled it around, and shoved it directly into his chest. Desmond stumbled back, his hands instinctively dropping the envelope into the dirt to catch the filthy metal, bar before it ruined his lapels. "What exactly are you doing?" he demanded, glaring at the machine. "You think this place is a biological hazard? You want the dirt so badly?" I stepped directly into his space, tilting my chin up to meet his glare. "Earn it. You fix the disrepair. You tame the yard." He blinked, entirely derailed. "Excuse me? You heard me," I whispered fiercely. "I am not selling to a coward who throws a checkbook at a problem just so he doesn't have to get his hands dirty. You want the deed? You mow the lawn." Personally, his jaw tightened. The panic was gone, replaced by the dangerous, hyper-competitive spark I remembered all too well from our college debate days. He hated losing. He especially hated losing to me. "You are being completely irrational," he bit out, his grip tightening on the mower's handle. "And you are standing on my property," I countered, crossing my arms over my chest. "Mow it, or get back in your little funeral car and drive away." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, a localized war of sheer stubbornness. Desmond's eyes narrowed into dark, calculating slits. "Fine," he breathed out. Without breaking eye contact, his fingers went to the top button of his dress shirt. He popped it open, then the next. My heart did a completely involuntary, furious little flip. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice suddenly losing its sharp edge. "Working," he replied smoothly. He shrugged off the tailored suit jacket, tossing it carelessly onto the hood of his obscenely expensive car. The crisp shirt followed, revealing a broad, intensely sculpted chest and shoulders that had definitely hardened since our dorm room days. The sheer, imposing reality of his physical presence was suddenly overwhelming, stealing the oxygen right out of the humid air. He grabbed the handles of the push mower, his muscles bunching, as he leaned his considerable weight forward. "Watch me work, Sybil." He shoved the machine into the thickest patch of knee-high weeds with the unstoppable force of a freight train. Snap. The rusted iron axle instantly sheared completely in half, the wooden handle breaking clean off and sending the billionaire, stumbling violently, forward to faceplant directly into a massive, muddy pile of fresh goose droppings. Chapter 2. The silence that followed was absolute, save for the wet, squelching sound of a billionaire pulling his face out of a mud puddle. Desmond pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. A thick clump of dark, nutrient-rich soil, and unmistakable avian fertilizer, clung to his left cheekbone. His pristine, custom-tailored dress shirt was ruined, smeared with a brown streak that stretched from his collarbone down to his belt. He didn't yell, he didn't curse. He just slowly wiped his face with the back of his hand, stood up with terrifying, rigid composure, and walked to his town car without a single word. He slid into the driver's seat, ruining the leather interior, and peeled out of the driveway so fast he took out a dying rhododendron. I thought that was the end of it. I genuinely believed I had won. But at 7 o'clock the next morning, the aggressive roar of a heavy-duty pickup truck rattled my bedroom windows. I dragged myself downstairs, coffee mug in hand, and stepped out onto the sagging wooden porch. The town car was gone. In its place was a massive, matte black truck bed loaded with every piece of shiny, professional-grade landscaping equipment money could buy. Desmond hopped out of the driver's seat. He had traded the suit for a tight black t-shirt and work boots that looked suspiciously brand new. He grabbed a pair of heavy leather gloves from his dashboard, slapping them against his thigh with grim determination. "You came back," I called out, leaning against the porch railing. "I'm genuinely shocked. I thought the mud might have melted you." Desmond shot me a withering glare, marching to the back of the truck to unlatch the tailgate. "I told you I was going to tame this biological hazard, Sybil. I don't leave a job unfinished. You realize landscaping requires actual skill, right?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "You can't just throw money at a weed and expect it to apologize and die." "Watch me," he muttered, reaching in to grab a gleaming, bright orange weed whacker. He didn't even get the chance to find the primer bulb. From the tall reeds near the edge of the property, a low, menacing hiss sliced through the morning air. It sounded like a tire leaking, only angrier. Desmond paused, his broad shoulders tensing. He turned his head just as Barnaby broke through the grass. Barnaby was a 15-pound Canada goose who had claimed my property 3 years ago. He was pure, unadulterated evil wrapped in feathers. The bird locked eyes with the towering alpha, lowered his black neck until it was parallel with the ground, and charged. What the? Desmond took a startled step back, holding the weed whacker up like a shield. Shoo, go away. Barnaby did not shoo. Barnaby accelerated, flapping his massive wings and letting out a demonic honk. Hey, back off, Desmond boomed, his voice dropping into that deep, chest-rattling register that usually made board members and rival CEOs tremble. His sheer physical presence was imposing enough to stop a charging bull. The goose did not care about corporate dominance. Barnaby lunged, snapping his beak aggressively at Desmond's very expensive denim-clad shins. Stop it! I am warning you, Desmond shouted, dancing backward in a frantic, undignified shuffle to avoid the snapping beak. Sybil, call off your guard dog. He's a free spirit, I yelled back, sitting down in one of the wicker porch chairs and setting my coffee aside. I reached into the pocket of my oversized cardigan, pulled out a handful of leftover popcorn from last night, and tossed a piece into my mouth. And his name is Barnaby. You're invading his territory. It's a bird, Desmond roared, desperately trying to pivot, as Barnaby flanked him, hissing violently. Because Desmond couldn't actually use his massive strength without seriously injuring the animal. He was completely defenseless. The billionaire developer was forced into a dead sprint toward his truck. He scrambled onto the hood, his heavy boots denting the pristine metal, and practically threw himself onto the roof of the cab. Barnaby stopped at the bumper, flapping his wings in victory, honking a triumphant battle cry into the humid morning air. Desmond sat cross-legged on the roof of his truck, chest heaving, his dark hair a mess. He glared down at the goose, then slowly lifted his gaze to me. I popped another piece of popcorn into my mouth, offering him a cheerful wave. Chapter 3. This is completely unnecessary, Desmond muttered, his massive frame practically vibrating with annoyance as he navigated the narrow, brightly lit aisles of Hank's Hardware. You broke my mower, I replied casually, strolling beside him. The scent of sawdust, fertilizer, and cut metal hung heavy in the air. You replace the mower, those are the rules of destruction. Plus, your shiny new equipment is sitting in your truck bed, currently being held hostage by a waterfowl. You need hand tools. He let out a sharp, frustrated breath. The aisle was too narrow for a man of his size. When we turned down the gardening row, his shoulder brushed against mine, a solid, heavy line of heat and friction that sent a completely uninvited jolt straight up my spine. I took a quick half step away, my bad knee twinging in protest. Desmond didn't seem to notice my flinch. His attention was entirely consumed by the rack of replacement mower parts. He stared at the selection of nylon weed whacker spools as if they were written in ancient Greek. Just grab the universal fit, I sighed. Reaching out, he intercepted my hand, his large fingers wrapping gently but firmly around my wrist. The touch was electric, completely short-circuiting my brain for a fraction of a second. I am not buying a universal fit, he said smoothly, his thumb unconsciously brushing my pulse point before he let go. I want the highest tensile strength available. I am not having this string snap the moment it hits one of your mutant dandelions. He grabbed a spool and turned to the end of the aisle, marching up to the register where Toby, a deeply terrified 16-year-old with a spray of acne, was organizing keychains. Excuse me, Desmond said, leaning his massive forearms on the counter. I need the specifications on the rotational drag of this nylon polymer. If I run this at 6,000 RPMs, what is the failure rate upon impact with dense brush? Toby blinked, his mouth dropping open. It cuts the grass, sir. I am aware of its primary function, Desmond pressed, slipping effortlessly into his ruthless negotiator persona. But I need assurances on the durability. Is there a warranty? Who is the manufacturer's regional distributor? Desmond, you are traumatizing him, I interrupted, stepping up to the counter. I slid a $20 bill toward Toby. Ignore him, Toby. He doesn't get outside much. I am ensuring quality control, Desmond argued, standing to his full height and glaring down at me. You are trying to assert dominance over a teenager at a hardware store because a goose hurt your feelings. I shot back, a slow, wicked smile spreading across my face. His jaw tightened, a dangerous, incredibly attractive flash of irritation sparking in his dark eyes. The goose did not hurt my feelings. It was a tactical retreat. Sure it was. I turned away from the counter and grabbed a massive, garishly pink plastic flamingo lawn ornament from a nearby display barrel. I slammed it down onto the counter right next to his high-tensile nylon wire. Ring this up too, Toby. Desmond stared at the neon plastic bird in abject horror. What is that? It's a peace offering for Barnaby, I said brightly, shoving the flamingo directly into his chest. You're carrying it to the truck. Consider it a trust-building exercise. He looked from the plastic flamingo to me and back again, realizing with crushing certainty that he had absolutely zero control over this situation. Chapter 4. I needed ground rules. If Desmond was actually going to be spending every day at my house acting like an overgrown, incredibly distracting lumberjack, we needed boundaries. I refused to let his chaotic corporate energy dictate my life. So the next morning, I decided to take the fight to his turf. Apex Tower was exactly what I expected. A towering obelisk of glass and steel that screamed cold, calculating power. The lobby was a massive expanse of polished marble, freezing air conditioning, and the faint, intimidating scent of money and expensive espresso. My worn, mud-scuffed combat boots squeaked loudly against the pristine floor, drawing the immediate, judgmental gaze of the security desk. "Excuse me, miss." A suited guard stepped into my path. "Do you have an appointment?" "I'm his landscaping supervisor," I lied smoothly, not breaking stride. "It's an emergency. Fertilizer crisis." Before the guard could process the absurdity of that statement, the soft ping of the private elevator echoed through the lobby. The polished silver doors slid open. My breath caught in my throat. Desmond stepped out, looking devastatingly handsome in a navy blue three-piece suit. But it wasn't his sharp tailoring that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was the three women flanking him. They looked like they had been genetically engineered in a luxury laboratory. Perfect silk blouses, immaculate blowouts, and stilettos that cost more than my entire property. They were clinging to his every word, laughing lightly at something he had just said, their manicured hands casually brushing his arms. A sudden, violent wave of jealousy hit my chest like a physical blow, the old, bruised parts of my heart. The parts that remembered waiting on that dorm couch, for a guy who never showed up, flared to life. Desmond looked up and saw me standing by the security desk. The polite, charming smile instantly vanished from his face, replaced by a look of absolute, unadulterated panic. He gently extricated himself from the women, striding quickly toward me. "Sybil, what are you doing here?" "I came to set a schedule," I said, my voice dripping with an icy, protective layer of sarcasm. I looked past his shoulder at the three women, who were now whispering to each other and staring at my overalls. "But I see you're currently in the middle of a runway show. My apologies." "It's not what you think," Desmond said quickly, his voice dropping low so the guards couldn't hear. It's a corporate arrangement. For a merger." "A corporate arrangement?" I arched an eyebrow, leaning in slightly. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the faint, lingering smell of my cut grass. "Desmond, if you need to buy dates in bulk to secure a business deal, your firm is in worse shape than my lawn." His eyes darkened, his frustration warring with the obvious embarrassment of his separate worlds colliding. "The board required a public courtship phase with the Northern Pax. It is entirely superficial." "Oh, I'm sure their personalities are very deep," I fired back cheerfully, taking a deliberate step backward towards the exit. "I just wanted to tell you not to touch the hydrangeas by the porch. They are fragile, kind of like your ego when you're around livestock." "Sybil, wait," he started, reaching a hand out. I spun on my heel, walking backward toward the sliding-less doors. I raised my hand, giving him a bright, terribly fake wave, pitching my voice loud enough for the entire marble lobby to hear. "Good luck with the harem, Desmond. Don't forget your weed whacker tomorrow." I spun around and marched out onto the hot pavement, leaving him completely speechless as the heavy glass doors sealed shut behind me. I didn't even make it to my truck before my phone buzzed. A calendar invite, aggressively stamped with high-priority red exclamation points. "Dinner. Apex Tower Executive Dining Room. 8 p.m. We need to discuss boundaries." 4 hours later, I was stepping out of the private elevator onto the penthouse floor. The dining room was an exercise in sterile, terrifying wealth, floor-to-soiling glass overlooking the glittering city skyline, matte black tables, and acoustic paneling that swallowed every sound except the anxiety pounding in my ears. Desmond was already seated at a corner table. He had discarded his jacket and tie, the top two buttons of his shirt undone, revealing a sliver of tanned, muscular chest that my brain absolutely did not need to register. You wore your work boots, he observed smoothly as I pulled out my own chair, the heavy crystal water goblets vibrating slightly as I bumped the table. You wore your ego, I fired back, tossing a faded denim jacket over the back of the chair. I thought we should both come dressed in our natural elements. He signaled a completely silent waiter who materialized out of the shadows, poured a bottle of dark, earthy Pinot Noir, and vanished. You caused a scene in my lobby today, Sybil, Desmond murmured, his voice dropping an octave as he slid a glass toward me. The scent of blackberries and crushed oak hit my nose. My board of directors requires that courtship to go smoothly. You deliberately humiliated me in front of them. Humiliated? I scoffed, taking a defiant sip of the wine. It tasted like expensive silk, which only made me angrier. I introduced myself. If acknowledging the existence of dirt ruins your little corporate romance, those women aren't going to survive a single weekend in the real world. They don't have to survive the real world, he snapped, leaning forward. His broad shoulders completely eclipsed the panoramic view of the city behind him. They just have to smile for the cameras so the Northern Pacs sign the merger. The sanctuary. The project I am trying to build on your land requires their funding. My land isn't a bargaining chip for your fake love life, I whispered fiercely, gripping the stem of my wine glass. The air between us was suddenly dense, the temperature in the room spiking. You think you can just orchestrate everything? Buy the land, buy the dates, buy your way out of ever having to actually care about anything? You think I don't care? His jaw clamped down, a muscle ticking violently near his ear. The composed billionaire was fracturing, revealing the primal, deeply frustrated alpha underneath. I am standing in waist-high weeds getting attacked by poultry because I refuse to walk. Away from that property, you're only there because you hate losing. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the polished marble floor. I'm done. Enjoy your sterile dinner, Desmond. Tell the Platinum Trio I said hi. I stood up, turning toward the elevator. Sybil. He moved faster than any human possibly could. Before I could take a second step, his hand clamped firmly around my wrist. I froze. The physical impact was like a live wire snapping against wet concrete. His palm was calloused from 2 days of manual labor, radiating a feverish, intoxicating heat that burned straight through the sleeve of my flannel shirt. He didn't pull me back, but his grip was unyielding, anchoring me to the spot. I slowly turned my head, my breath catching in my throat. Desmond was standing inches away. His chest heaved, his dark eyes locked onto mine with a desperate, terrifying intensity that had absolutely nothing to do with real estate. Don't, he breathed out, his thumb slowly, unconsciously stroking the erratic pulse jumping at my wrist. Don't walk away from me again. I stared up at him, my defenses crumbling under the sudden, suffocating realization that the chemistry between us hadn't died 4 years ago. It had just been lying in wait. The sky broke open at noon the next day, dumping sheets of torrential, blinding rain across the Green Hollow estate. I was soaked to the bone in seconds, desperately trying to drag a massive tarp over the exposed fertilizer bags near the shed. The air tasted like ozone and crushed wet leaves. Through the gray hazes of the downpour, I heard the desperate, whining screech of a motorized engine. I sprinted toward the back 40 acres. Desmond was sitting atop a bright green rented riding mower, gripping the steering wheel like he was trying to strangle it. The back tires were sunk deep into a treacherous, sucking pit of mud, spinning violently and spraying thick brown sludge in a 10-foot arc. Kill the engine, I screamed over the roaring rain, slipping on the slick grass as I reached him. You're just digging it deeper. He slammed his hand against the ignition, cutting the power. The sudden silence was filled only by the heavy drumming of the rain. Desmond dragged a massive, mud-caked hand down his face, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. His wet t-shirt clung to every ridge of his chest and abdomen like a second skin. The ground gave way, he shouted defensively, hopping off the mower. His heavy boots instantly sank 4 inches into the muck. It's a drainage basin, you idiot. I yelled back, swiping wet hair out of my eyes. Grab the front bumper. We have to rock it out before the axle snaps. He didn't argue. He waded to the front of the machine, bracing his boots in the mud. I stepped beside him, my shoulder brushing against his bicep. Despite the freezing rain, his skin radiated an immense, furnace-like heat. On 3, I instructed, wedging my hands under the slick metal frame. 1, 2, 3. Pull! We heaved backward. Desmond's muscles coiled tight, the sheer terrifying power of his alpha genetics finally put to practical use. The mower groaned, shifting an inch out of the rut. "Again," I shouted. We pulled. My boots lost traction on the slick mud. I shifted my weight to compensate, planting my right foot hard against a buried rock. Pop. A blinding, sickening spike of agony shot entirely through my bad knee. I let out a sharp gasp, my leg buckling instantly. I pitched backward, falling toward the flooded earth. I never hit the ground. Desmond's arm wrapped around my waist like an iron band, hauling me flush against his chest. The impact knocked the breath out of me. He smelled like rain, hot skin, and panic. "Sybil," he demanded, his voice slicing cleanly through the noise of the storm. "What happened? Where are you hurt?" "I'm fine," I lied through chattering teeth, trying to push away from his solid chest. My knee throbbed so violently it made my vision blur. "Just lost my footing." He looked down at my right leg, which I was completely unable to put weight on. The panic in his eyes hardened into something fiercely protective. Without a single word of sarcasm, without asking permission, he bent his knees, scooped one arm under my thighs, and lifted me effortlessly into the air. "Hey, put me down," I protested weakly, gripping his broad shoulders to keep my balance as the rain pounded against us. "Shut up," he ordered softly, his jaw set like stone. He carried me through the mud, his strides long and impossibly steady. He didn't complain about the heavy rain. He didn't gloat about my weakness. He just held me tight against his chest, shielding me from the worst of the storm. As we reached the shelter of the front porch, he gently set me down on the wicker bench. He knelt on the wooden floorboards, his expensive boots ruined, completely ignoring the mud dripping from his own face as his large, calloused hands reached for the hem of my soaked jeans. "It's the right knee, isn't it?" he asked quietly, not looking up. "The same one you injured hiking your sophomore year." My breath hitched. I stared down at his wet, bowed head, my heart suddenly hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He remembered. After 4 years, he remembered exactly where I was broken. Saturday morning at the town farmer's market was a sensory explosion of crushed peaches, roasting kettle corn, and aggressive local gossip. I was balancing 2 canvas bags of organic squash when I spotted him. Desmond was standing near the artisanal honey booth, looking dangerously handsome in a tailored, casual linen shirt that rolled up at the forearms. Next to him, clinging to his bicep like a terrified barnacle, was one of the platinum trio. She was wearing a white silk sundress and strappy wedges that were absolutely failing to navigate the cobblestone street. The jealous ache in my chest flared instantly, but I refused to let it win. Instead, a deeply wicked, petty idea formed in my brain. I plastered on a beaming, unhinged smile and marched directly toward them. "Desmond," I shouted cheerfully, shoving my way past a table of heirloom tomatoes. He turned, the polite smile instantly dropping off his face when he saw me. He tried to take a subtle step away from his date, but she clung tighter. "Sybil," he said cautiously, his eyes darting to my canvas bags. "I didn't realize you frequented the market. Are you kidding?" "I'm the local foliage expert," I chirped, coming to a halt directly in front of them. I turned my brightest smile on his bewildered date. "Hi, I'm Sybil. I'm Desmond's landscaping supervisor." The woman blinked, her manicured fingers pressing against her chest. "His supervisor?" "Oh, absolutely," I nodded seriously, leaning in like I was sharing a state secret. "He's been working the soil for me all week. Honestly, his stamina is incredible, but he's terrible with the heavy machinery, gets stuck in the mud constantly. He's completely ruined 2 pairs of pants." Desmond let out a choked sound, his face turning a fascinating shade of red. "Sybil, that is a gross mischaracterization of our arrangement." "Is it?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a heavy 50-pound sack of locally sourced, aggressively pungent organic manure. I slammed it directly into Desmond's chest. He caught it instinctively, the sheer weight of it nearly knocking him backward into a display of honeycombs. "I need you to haul this to my truck, Des," I ordered, patting his shoulder condescendingly. "We have a lot of fertilizing to do later. Try not to spill it on your nice linen." The smell of the manure wafted upward. The platinum date let out a horrified squeak, taking 3 rapid, wobbly steps backward on her wedges. "Desmond," she gasped, covering her nose with a silk handkerchief. I think I need to wait in the car. This environment is entirely too agricultural." She didn't wait for his reply, turning and fleeing down the cobblestones as fast as her heels would allow. I watched her go, crossing my arms over my chest, feeling a surge of pure, malicious triumph. Desmond stood perfectly still, clutching the sack of manure. Slowly, he turned his head to look at me. The annoyance in his dark eyes was melting into something entirely different. Something's hot, amused, and fiercely competitive. "You did that on purpose," he murmured, his voice dropping low enough that the passing shoppers couldn't hear. "I have no idea what you're talking about," I lied, unable to stop the grin spreading across my face. He took a step closer, the distance between us vanishing in the crowded market. The heat of his body cut right through the morning breeze. "You're jealous, Sybil," he whispered, a slow, devastating smirk curving his lips. "I'm efficient," I corrected breathlessly, my heart betraying me by skipping a beat. He leaned in, his lips hovering a dangerous, agonizing inch from my ear. "If you wanted me all to yourself," he murmured, the vibration of his voice sending a terrifying shiver down my spine, "all you had to do was ask." His breath was hot against my neck, the deep timbre of his voice vibrating straight through my ribs. I practically shoved the heavy bag of manure back into his chest, my face burning with a flush that had absolutely nothing to do with the summer heat. "Load the truck, Alpha," I managed to say, my voice embarrassingly breathless, "before I decide to compost your shoes." By noon, we were back at the estate. Apparently, my little stunt at the market had bruised his ego, or awakened that terrifyingly stubborn competitive streak. Because Desmond immediately marched toward the dense, overgrown thicket bordering the eastern fence line. He ditched his ruined linen shirt, grabbed a rusted pair of loppers, and waded directly into the brush like a man going to war. I was on the porch icing my knee, assuming he was just wrangling some stubborn blackberries. It wasn't until 2 hours later when he stumbled out of the woods, his massive chest and arms covered in bright red angry welts, that I realized his fatal error. "Desmond," I said slowly, standing up so fast the ice pack hit the floorboards. "What did you just roll in?" "Brush," he grunted, aggressively scratching his forearm. "It's cleared, though the local flora seems unusually hostile." "Leaves of 3, let it be," I whispered in horror. "Tell me you didn't just bare hand an acre of poison ivy." He froze, his hand hovering over a massive welt on his collarbone. "I have a superior biological immune system. It's just a rash." 10 minutes later, his superior biology was losing a spectacular battle against the toxic oil. He was sitting backward on a wooden chair in my kitchen, his jaw clenched tight as I dabbed bright pink calamine lotion across his broad, heavily muscled shoulders with a cotton pad. The physical proximity was agonizing. His skin was radiating an immense, furnace-like heat, and the damp scent of sweat, crushed pine, and sheer alpha frustration filled my tiny kitchen. Every time my fingers accidentally brushed his bare skin, a visible shudder rolled down his spine. "Stop moving," I scolded gently, dabbing a particularly angry patch right over his left shoulder blade. "It burns," he muttered, his voice a low, gravelly growl. "How does a plant orchestrate such a vicious defense mechanism?" "It's nature, Desmond. You can't just intimidate it into submission." I leaned in closer, my chest almost brushing his back. "You have to respect it. You realize you look like a giant, very angry pink polka dot, right?" I noted, swirling the cotton pad in the bottle to lighten the mood. "I am reconsidering my stance on the biological hazard of this property." He gritted out, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the chair. "I should have paved the entire forest. And miss out on this quality bonding time?" I smirked, blowing softly on the wet lotion to dry it. He sucked in a sharp, hissing breath at the sensation, his back arching slightly. "Sybil, you are playing a very dangerous game." "I'm applying first aid," I replied smoothly, though my hands were shaking slightly. He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes catching mine over his shoulder. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt heavy, suffocatingly thick. "I'm starting to realize," he whispered softly, "that I know absolutely nothing about the things that actually matter." Before I could process the raw vulnerability in his confession, a loud, sharp knock rattled my front door, shattering the moment entirely. The knock on the door delivered a courier with a heavy, wax-sealed envelope. It was a formal summons from the Apex Development Board of Directors. Desmond's unauthorized landscaping project had officially drawn the ire of the pack elders. 48 hours later, I was stepping into the hyper-sterile, freezing expanse of the Apex Tower boardroom. The massive mahogany table was lined with 8 men in immaculate, terrifyingly expensive suits. At the head of the table sat Desmond, back in his corporate armor, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. I hadn't worn a suit. I wore my favorite floral blazer, a pair of dark jeans, and my combat boots. I smelled like lavender and absolute defiance. Miss Sybil, the chairman, an older alpha with silver hair and a gaze like crushed ice, began without preamble. Your continued refusal to vacate the Green Hollow property is destabilizing a multi-million-dollar PAC initiative. Your land is useless. The soil is dead. The soil is dormant, I corrected loudly, dropping my leather satchel onto the polished table with a heavy thud. And if your environmental survey team actually knew the difference between perennial decay and nitrogen depletion, they wouldn't have drafted this piece of fiction. I pulled out their own glossy ecological report and tossed it across the table. It slid perfectly to a stop right in front of the chairman. Section 4, page 12, I stated, leaning forward, bracing my hands on the mahogany. You claim the groundwater is too alkaline to support the Elder Sanctuary gardens, but you completely ignored the limestone bedrock runoff. If you plant hydrangeas and rhododendrons, they'll suffocate. If you plant native sedge and switchgrass, which I have already cultivated, the soil will naturally balance within 2 seasons. The boardroom went dead silent. The chairman blinked, entirely unaccustomed to being lectured on dirt. I glanced down to the end of the table. Desmond was leaning back in his leather chair. He wasn't looking at the report. He was staring directly at me. His dark eyes were completely blown wide, a primal, undeniable flare of absolute awe burning in his gaze. He wasn't annoyed by my defiance. He was utterly, helplessly captivated by it. Furthermore, I continued, the adrenaline singing in my veins, your proposed excavation will destroy the natural root systems holding the eastern embankment together. The moment the autumn rains hit, your sanctuary is going to slide straight into the municipal drainage basin. Are we really going to let a local botanist dictate our corporate strategy? One of the board members sneered, looking to Desmond. She isn't dictating, Desmond rumbled, his voice dropping into that chest-rattling alpha register that commanded absolute authority. He stood up slowly, never breaking eye contact with me. She is correcting your incompetence, and she is entirely right. The chairman's face turned an ugly shade of plum. Desmond, need I remind you that this merger requires the approval of the Northern PACs? Approval that hinges on your upcoming courtship gala on that very property? The property is fine, Desmond growled, taking a protective step toward me. We will see about that, the chairman snapped, standing up. Because, tomorrow at noon, I am sending the 3 debutantes to Green Hollow for a full site inspection. If that estate is not suitable for high society guests, we will seize the land through municipal eminent domain and you will be stripped of your firm. The board wasn't bluffing. The next day at noon, a stretched white limousine navigated the dirt road leading to Green Hollow, looking completely absurd against the backdrop of my overgrown willow trees. I was elbow-deep in mud, desperately trying to tighten a rusted wrench around the main irrigation valve. The sudden summer heat wave had caused the old iron pipes to swell, and the pressure gauge was ticking dangerously into the red. The limo doors opened. Out stepped the Platinum Trio. They wore identical expressions of sheer, unadulterated horror. Stiletta sank instantly into the damp earth. Silk skirts fluttered in the humid breeze. They looked like exotic, incredibly fragile birds dropped into a war zone. Desmond was standing by the porch, holding a clipboard, attempting to look like the polished CEO in charge of a pristine development site. The illusion was completely shattered when Barnaby, the goose, let out a demonic honk from the pond, causing all 3 women to scream and huddle behind Desmond's broad shoulders. Desmond, the tallest one shrieked, clutching his bicep. What is that? That beast. It's a goose, Clarissa, Desmond sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He won't bother you if you don't make eye contact. I wiped a smear of mud off my forehead, watching him struggle to maintain his alpha composure while literally shielding a woman from a waterfowl. Hey, Desmond, I yelled over the hissing of the failing pipe. The PR team looks a little pale. You want me to get them some lemonade before the wildlife eats them? He glared at me, a muscle ticking in his jaw. He gently detached Clarissa's manicured claws from his shirt and started marching toward me. Sybil, we had a deal. You said the front lawn was secure. It is secure, I argued, throwing my entire body weight against the heavy iron wrench. But the old irrigation main is about to. Before I could finish the sentence, the rusted valve gave a metallic, agonizing groan. Crack. The pipe sheared clean off. A terrifying geyser of pressurized, muddy water exploded straight up into the air, raining a thick, brown deluge over the entire front yard. The three debutantes shrieked in absolute terror as a wave of muddy water cascaded toward their designer. Shoes. Do something, Clarissa screamed, waving her arms frantically. Desmond froze for a fraction of a second. He looked back at the three women. The key to his corporate merger, the future of his company, the pristine image his board demanded. Then he looked at me. I was on my knees in the mud, wrestling desperately with the geyser, completely soaked and rapidly losing ground. He didn't even hesitate. Desmond abandoned his clipboard in the dirt. He sprinted toward the geyser, sliding the last 5 feet through the mud on his knees, ruining his trousers completely. He grabbed the iron wrench with both of his massive, calloused hands, his biceps bulging as he threw his immense alpha strength against the rushing water. Turn the secondary valve, he roared over the sound of the spray, his face inches from mine, completely drenched in mud and ignoring the horrified gasps of his dates behind him. I lunged for the secondary lever, slamming it down. The geyser sputtered and died, leaving us both kneeling in a massive puddle of brown sludge, chests heaving, breathing heavily into each other's space. Desmond, a furious, sharp voice cut through the silence. We both looked up. The chairman of the board was stepping out of the limousine, staring at the ruined, mud-soaked Alpha, and the three crying debutantes. You have 48 hours to publicly propose to one of these women, the chairman stated coldly, or the sanctuary deal is dead, and the bulldozers arrive on Monday. The limousine's taillights vanished down the gravel drive, taking the chairman and his catastrophic ultimatum with them. Desmond and I were left kneeling in the mud, surrounded by the wreckage of the burst pipe and the deafening chirp of evening cicadas. He didn't speak. He just slowly wiped a thick layer of sludge from his cheek, his breathing heavy and measured. By nightfall, we were sitting on the sagging front porch. I had tossed him a towel and a glass of aggressively cheap powdered lemonade. The humidity clung to us, thick and suffocating, wrapping around the wooden columns of the house. Desmond stared out at the dark yard, the glass looking ridiculously small in his massive calloused hand. He had stripped off his ruined shirt, leaving his broad chest bare to the humid night air. I pointedly kept my gaze fixed on the ice cubes clinking in my own glass. 48 hours, I murmured, the ice hitting my teeth. That's a tight window to buy a ring and fake a lifetime of devotion. I'm not proposing to Clarissa, he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel crushed under a heavy tire. Well, the bulldozers begged to differ. I pulled my knees to my chest, wincing as a dull ache shot through my bad joint. You should have let the pipe burst. You should have stayed clean. Desmond turned his head. His dark eyes caught the faint, yellow glow of the porch light, locking onto me with a terrifying, unblinking focus. I am never going to stand by and watch you drown, Sybil, he stated softly. In mud or in anything else. The absolute sincerity in his tone stripped away every sarcastic defense I had prepared. The banter died in my throat. I swallowed hard, tracing the condensation on my glass. Then why did you? I whispered, the words escaping before I could trap them behind my teeth. He flinched. It was a microscopic movement, but his massive shoulders went completely rigid. Why did you leave? I pressed, my voice trembling slightly. You didn't just walk away, Desmond. You vanished. You changed your number. You left me sitting on that dorm couch, waiting for a coffee you never brought back. He closed his eyes, a muscle ticking violently in his jaw. The silence stretched, agonizing and heavy, filled only by the hum of the southern night. When he finally opened his eyes, the carefully constructed corporate mask was entirely gone. He looked raw, he looked terrified. Sybil, you have to understand, he began, leaning toward me. The space between us shrank to a sliver. I could see the rapid pulse beating at the base of his throat. When the alpha mantle passed to me, the biological shift, it was violent. The pack politics were ruthless. I was a coward, yes, but I ran because bzzz. The jarring, mechanical shriek of his cell phone violently shattered the quiet. Desmond froze, staring at the screen lighting up the dark porch. It was his lead PR director. The damage control had already begun. Don't answer it, I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. He looked from the flashing screen to my face, his expression completely torn. The phone kept screaming, demanding his attention, dragging him back to the billionaire empire he was desperately trying to hold together. He slowly reached out and answered the call. The temporary victory of a silenced phone didn't survive the sunrise. By 8 in the morning, the heavy, claustrophobic air of my greenhouse was packed with 3 notoriously uncompromising pack elders. The chairman had clearly sent reinforcements. They wore tweed in 90-degree weather, their expressions pinched as they navigated the wildly overgrown aisles of my heirloom tomatoes. Desmond stood shoulder to shoulder with me, his imposing frame blocking the elders from stepping on a delicate row of creeping thyme. He was back in his corporate armor, a crisp button-down tucked into dark slacks, but the sleeves were rolled up, exposing the scratches he'd earned clearing my brush. "This is your proposed botanical director?" Elder Vance sneered, swatting a rogue tomato vine away from his face. "The woman who orchestrated yesterday's mudslide? The environment is entirely untamed. It lacks discipline. It's an ecosystem, Vance, not a boardroom," I shot back, wiping dirt from my cheek. "Discipline in a garden just means you're killing anything that doesn't look identical." "That's not a sanctuary. That's a cemetery." Desmond let out a low, deeply appreciative hum. The sound vibrated right through the humid air, sending a completely involuntary shiver down my spine. "She is preserving the natural integrity of the land," Desmond added smoothly, his voice a dark, authoritative rumble that commanded absolute attention. "The elder sanctuary requires peace, not a paved parking lot. Ms. Sybil's methods are unconventional, but her results are undeniable." He stepped closer to me, his arm brushing mine. The sheer, overwhelming power of his physical presence was a tangible force in the cramped space. He wasn't just defending my property. He was defending me, standing as an immovable wall between my chaotic world and his rigid one. Vance narrowed his eyes, clearly unimpressed by our united front. He pulled a folded document from his tweed pocket, the crisp white paper looking stark and dangerous against the vibrant green foliage. "Your sentimentality is a liability, Desmond," Vance stated coldly, tapping the paper against his palm. "The northern packs are threatening to pull out of the merger completely after yesterday's disaster. They believe you lack the stability to lead." "I lead just fine," Desmond growled, his jaw tightening. "Then prove it," Vance countered, stepping forward. He thrust the document into Desmond's chest. "We have bypassed the chairman. This is the finalized eminent domain filing. It's already been fast-tracked through the municipal court." My stomach plummeted. The air in the greenhouse suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I stared at the legal death warrant for my family's legacy. "You have until the gala tomorrow night." Vance delivered the ultimatum with surgical precision. "Announce your formal engagement to Clarissa on the main stage, and we withdraw the filing. If you refuse, the bulldozers will be here on Monday morning, and you will be out of a company." Vance turned on his heel, pushing his way through the tomato vines and leaving us entirely alone in the suffocating heat. I stared blindly at the white document in Desmond's rigid hand. The heavy, earthy scent of damp soil suddenly made me incredibly nauseous. "They've cornered you," I whispered, the reality crashing down. "You can't fight the municipal court and the pack elders at the same time." Desmond slowly crumpled the legal filing in his massive fist, his knuckles turning stark white. He turned to look at me, his eyes dark, dangerous, and utterly desperate. "Watch me." Sleep was an absolute impossibility. The gala was less than 18 hours away, and the weight of the elders' ultimatum hung over the estate like a suffocating blanket. At midnight, the only sound on the property was the rhythmic, metallic clinking of a wrench. I marched out the front door, the cool night air biting through my thin cotton pajamas. Down on the lawn, illuminated purely by the pale wash of the moon, Desmond was on his knees. He was viciously wrestling with the main sprinkler head, the exact same rusted contraption that had started this entire disastrous wager. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my bare feet sinking into the damp, cool grass. "Fixing it," he grunted, not looking up. His shoulders bunched with every aggressive twist of the heavy iron wrench. He was wearing nothing but a pair of faded jeans, the moonlight catching the hard, sculpted lines of his back. "It's midnight, Desmond. You're going to strip the threading." I dropped to my knees beside him, grabbing the opposite side of the wrench. "Let go. You're just breaking it further." "I am not breaking it," he snapped, his voice tight and breathless. "I am trying to ensure the grass survives the week." "The grass doesn't matter," I yelled, pulling hard on the tool. "The bulldozers are coming on Monday. You're getting engaged tomorrow. Why are you out here fighting a piece of plumbing?" He ripped the wrench out of my hands, tossing it violently into the darkness. Because it's the only thing I can control right now, he roared, the sheer primal volume of his voice echoing across the empty fields. The silence that followed was deafening. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling in sharp, jagged rhythms. I stared at him, my heart hammering a frantic, terrifying beat against my ribs. You can control your choices, I whispered, my voice shaking. You can choose the company. You can choose Clarissa. I don't want the company if it means letting them pave over you. He fired back, closing the distance between us in a single, desperate movement. His hands clamped down on my shoulders, his grip entirely unyielding. The physical power radiating from him was intoxicating, completely overwhelming my senses. His face was inches from mine, his dark eyes searching my expression with a raw, agonizing hunger. "Sybil," he murmured, his voice dropping into a rough, jagged rasp. "I am completely, entirely out of my depth." "You're a billionaire alpha," I breathed, my gaze dropping to his lips. "You're never out of your depth." "I am right now," he confessed. Before I could formulate a sarcastic response, a loud, mechanical clunk echoed from the ground. The sprinkler valve, miraculously dislodged by his earlier assault, suddenly engaged. A torrential, freezing blast of high-pressure water erupted directly into our faces. I gasped, the shock of the cold water stealing my breath. I expected him to pull away, to curse the broken machinery and retreat. Instead, Desmond's hands slid from my shoulders to frame my face. He didn't care about the freezing water. He didn't care about the mud. He leaned down, his mouth crashing down onto mine in a fierce, breathless, and utterly desperate kiss that completely shattered the world around us. The cold water battered us, soaking through my pajamas and his jeans, but I didn't care. His mouth was frantic, desperate, tasting like rain and pure adrenaline. His large, calloused hands slid from my jaw to tangle in my wet hair, holding me in place as if he were terrified I might dissolve into the mist. I kissed him back with 4 years of pent-up, unresolved fury, and something far more terrifying. When we finally broke apart, we were both gasping, the broken sprinkler still spraying a chaotic, muddy arc over our ankles. "Tomorrow," he murmured against my mouth, his broad chest heaving as he rested his forehead against mine. "Let me get through the gala tomorrow. I am fixing this, Sybil, all of it." By noon the next day, the Green Hollow estate was completely unrecognizable. Massive, sweeping white canvas tents had been erected across the freshly manicured lawn. The familiar, comforting scent of my blooming jasmine was completely overwhelmed by the smell of catered truffles, roasted lamb, and imported champagne. A crew of terrifyingly efficient caterers buzzed like frantic bees, adjusting floral arrangements that cost more than my entire truck. I watched from the porch as men in matching polo shirts tried to hang heavy crystal chandeliers from my ancient, sagging willow trees. Desmond was orchestrating the chaos with ruthless precision. He was dressed in a pristine, custom-tailored tuxedo, looking devastatingly sharp, though the dark circles under his eyes betrayed his absolute exhaustion. "You realize," I noted, stepping up beside him and plucking a perfectly glazed strawberry from a passing silver tray, "that Barnaby is currently hiding in the hydrangeas, waiting to ambush the string quartet." Desmond rubbed his temple, his shoulders slumping just a fraction. "I have already paid off the cellist to ignore the wildlife. Please tell me you aren't going to wear mud-stained overalls tonight." "I clean up incredibly well, Desmond," I countered, tossing the strawberry stem into a nearby bin. "You might actually be intimidated. I noticed you vetoed my suggestion of serving the organic squash we bought," I teased, bumping my shoulder against his arm. "The board expects caviar, Sybil, not aggressively pungent, fertilizer-adjacent vegetables. Your loss, it builds character." A slow, dangerous smile curved his lips. He leaned in, his voice dropping into a commanding register that made my toes curl inside my boots. "I think we have enough character on this property to last a lifetime. I will see you tonight." I retreated to the house to change, a completely foolish, buoyant sense of hope blooming in my chest. He was going to reject the elders. He was going to choose this. I had just zipped up my dark emerald evening gown, admiring the heavy silk in my vanity mirror, when my phone buzzed violently on the dresser. A news alert. From the local PAC Society page, Apex CEO secures Northern merger, formal engagement to Clarissa Vance to be announced tonight. Below the headline was a glossy, high-definition photo of Desmond, taken earlier that morning, smiling and shaking hands with Clarissa's father. The air completely vanished from my bedroom. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering loudly against the hardwood floor. I stared blindly at the glowing screen, the words blurring as the blood rushed in my ears. He had lied. The midnight kiss, the desperate promises in the rain. It was all just a tactical, calculated maneuver to keep me compliant while he secured his corporate throne. Outside, the gentle, swelling notes of a cello drifted through my open window. The gala had officially begun. I didn't cry. Anger, cold, sharp, and intensely clarifying, flooded my veins. I picked up my phone, grabbed a pen from my desk, and walked out the door. I stepped off the porch into a sea of silk, diamonds, and suffocatingly expensive perfume. Pack elites mingled under the fairy lights, laughing and clinking crystal flutes. It was his world, completely paving over mine. The stifling mix of designer cologne completely masked the scent of damp earth. I found him near the main stage. He was speaking to the chairman, looking like the perfect, untouchable billionaire. Then he saw me. His dark eyes widened. He excused himself immediately, striding toward me with a look of absolute relief. "Sybil, you look stunning. I need to talk to you before the speeches." "Save it," I interrupted, my voice completely devoid of any sarcasm. It was flat, empty. He stopped, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What's wrong?" I reached a nearby cocktail table, picking up a crisp white linen napkin. I pulled the pen from my clutch and quickly scrawled my signature across the fabric. "What are you doing?" he demanded, taking a step closer, his tall frame suddenly vibrating with tension. "Giving you exactly what you want," I said softly, holding the napkin out. "It's a legally binding proxy signature for the deed. Have your lawyers transfer the property? The land is yours." Desmond stared at the napkin as if it were a live grenade. "Sybil, no, I told you, I am fixing this." "You did fix it," I countered, pulling up the news article on my phone and shoving the screen toward his chest. "Congratulations on your engagement, Desmond. I hope Clarissa likes geese." His face went entirely ashen. He reached for my arm, his massive hand wrapping around my elbow, but I yanked it back as if he had burned me. "That was leaked by the elders. I didn't authorize that." "Sybil, you have to listen to me. I spent 4 years waiting for an explanation from you," I whispered, the final thread of my composure snapping. "I am not spending another second." I dropped the signed napkin onto the crushed grass at his perfectly polished shoes. I turned my back on the billionaire, the music, and the only home I had ever known, and walked into the dark. The silence in my bedroom was deafening, broken only by the rough scrape of cardboard as I dragged a moving box across the floor. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fold my jeans. I pulled a duffel bag from the closet, tossing in whatever I could reach. The smell of old wood and lavender suddenly felt suffocating. I just needed to leave. Suddenly, the heavy oak front door downstairs slammed open with enough force to rattle the floorboards. "Sybil!" His roar shook the entire house. Heavy, frantic footsteps pounded up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. I didn't even have time to turn around before Desmond filled my bedroom doorway. He looked completely unhinged. The custom tuxedo jacket was gone. His bow tie was untied, hanging loosely around his collar. His chest heaved, and in his right fist he gripped the shredded, torn pieces of the cocktail napkin I had signed. "You are not leaving," he gasped, stepping aggressively into the room. "Get out of my house," I snapped, throwing a pile of sweaters into the box without looking at him. "Go back to your party. Your fiancé is waiting." "There is no party," he shouted, throwing the shredded pieces of the napkin onto the floor like confetti. I tore the deed up in front of the board. I fired the PR team on the stage. I told Clarissa the arrangement was void. I froze, my hands hovering over the cardboard box. "You, what?" "I burned it down, Sybil," he breathed out, closing the distance between us until he was towering over me, his dark eyes frantic and pleading. "I burned the whole corporate cage down, because I refused to run away this time." "You ran away because you didn't want me," I yelled, the heartbreak finally cracking my voice. "I ran away because my pack was ruthless," he roared back, grabbing my shoulders, his grip desperate but shockingly gentle. "When the alpha title passed to me in college, my rivals tried to strip the firm. They saw you as a liability, a human weakness they could exploit. If I had brought you into that world, they would have torn you apart just to break me." The room plunged into a stunned, ringing silence. I stared up at him. His composure was completely gone. He wasn't the arrogant billionaire or the polished executive. He was just the guy I had loved, confessing his deepest failure. "I was 21 years old, Sybil," he whispered, his voice cracking violently. "I didn't have the power to protect you then. so I walked away to keep you safe. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was just a coward. And I have spent the last 4 years regretting every single day I didn't fight for you. My breath hitched, the anger draining completely from my veins, leaving me utterly exposed to the raw, devastating truth. The raw, devastating truth hung in the air between us, heavy and absolute. I stared up into Desmond's dark eyes, searching for the polished billionaire, the arrogant alpha, the corporate shark who threw money at every inconvenience. He wasn't there. Instead, I saw the 21-year-old boy who had debated philosophy with me until dawn, looking utterly wrecked. His hands were still gripping my shoulders, firm, grounding, but completely stripped of their usual commanding force. His thumb unconsciously stroked my collarbone, a desperate, anchoring gesture that sent a chaotic flutter straight to my chest. "You tore up the deed," I repeated slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. The scent of his expensive, rained-rampant tuxedo mixed with the familiar, comforting smell of the old floorboards. "You blew up your own merger. The board is going to crucify you." "Let them," Desmond rasped, exhaling a long, shuddering breath. He dropped his forehead to rest against mine, the physical proximity suddenly closing the 4-year gap between us in a single heartbeat. "I don't care about the board, Sybil. I don't care about the Tower or the Northern Pack alliances. I care about this, you, this wildly overgrown, completely illogical piece of land." I let out a wet, breathless laugh, my hands slowly coming up to rest flat against the crisp fabric of his dress shirt. "You hate my lawn, Desmond. You literally declared war on my weeds." "I hate the mower," he corrected, a faint, devastatingly handsome smirk finally touching the corners of his mouth. "I have a deep, profound respect for the weeds. They are terrifyingly resilient. Just like you, the last lingering walls of my defense crumbled into dust." I slid my arms up, wrapping them securely around his neck. The tension that had held his massive frame, rigid for days, instantly shattered. He hauled me flush against him, burying his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply as if I were the only oxygen left in the room. "So," I murmured, my lips brushing against his jawline, "what exactly is the plan, Mr. CEO? Because the elders are still going to send bulldozers on Monday." Desmond pulled back just enough to look at me, the sharp, calculating alpha returning to his gaze, but this time it was entirely focused on us as a team. "No, they aren't, because the deed is still in your name. And tomorrow morning, you and I are going to file a joint conservation trust." I blinked, genuinely surprised. "A trust?" "A partnership," he clarified smoothly, his hand sliding down to rest securely on my waist. "I am stepping down as managing director of Apex. I will personally fund the Elder Sanctuary, but it will be built entirely on your terms. No paved parking lots, no sterile corporate landscaping. You are the lead botanical director. We build it together." "You're giving up your corporate empire?" I arched an eyebrow, trying to suppress the massive, foolish grin taking over my face. "To plant heirloom tomatoes and argue with me about soil alkalinity? I am trading a sterile boardroom for domestic chaos," he murmured, his thumb tracing the curve of my lower lip. "It seems like a massive upgrade." I grabbed the lapels of his ruined tuxedo jacket, tugging him closer. "You realize you still have to fix my sprinkler, right?" "I will buy a new one," he promised instantly. "No," I countered, my eyes narrowing in mock severity. "You are going to fix the old one, with a wrench, like a peasant." Desmond let out a rich, chest-rattling laugh that vibrated straight through my palms. "You are an absolute menace, Sybil, and you are entirely out of your depth," I whispered. "Completely," he agreed. He didn't hesitate this time. His mouth came down on mine, hungry, demanding, and incredibly sweet. The kiss didn't taste like a bitter rivalry or a desperate corporate maneuver. It tasted like absolute certainty. My fingers tangled in his dark hair, pulling him closer as he backed me slowly toward the doorframe, the world outside. The pack elders, the ruined gala, the looming bulldozers, completely ceased to exist. We stumbled out of the bedroom, moving blindly down the hallway and out onto the sagging front porch. The night air was cool, wrapping around us as we broke apart, both of us breathless and smiling like idiots under the glow of the yellow porch light. "I think," Desmond murmured, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to my temple, "that I am finally starting to understand the appeal of the countryside." Before I could agree, a terrifyingly familiar rustle erupted from the hydrangeas beside the stairs. A low, demonic hiss sliced through the romantic quiet. Desmond froze, his broad shoulders stiffening. He slowly turned his head. Barnaby broke through the foliage, his black neck lowered. His wings flared in absolute fury. He locked eyes with the towering alpha, let out a triumphant honk, and charged directly up the wooden steps. "Sybil, call him off!" Desmond shouted, his romantic composure shattering as he desperately shuffled backward. Barnaby lunged, his beak snapping viciously, completely latching onto the expensive Italian leather of Desmond's left shoe. "Hey, let go, you overgrown feather duster." Desmond tried to shake his foot, completely helpless against 15 pounds of pure territorial rage. I collapsed against the porch railing, clutching my stomach as I laughed harder than I had in 4 years. The billionaire developer was finally home, and the domestic chaos was absolutely permanent. I know, we are still recovering from that intense reunion too. But if you think this alpha was obsessed, you haven't seen anything yet. When a dangerously smug alpha king gets snowed in with the stubborn financial auditor investigating him, professional boundaries literally go up in flames. Click the video on your screen right now to watch.